You're listening to the 10x Your Agency podcast, where every Wednesday for the next 12 weeks, you'll be learning strategies on how to scale up your agency and grow your client base from successful agency owners who've been there, done it, and built a highly successful agency. You'll learn how they attract clients, what their biggest causes of client churn were, and what their challenges were at different stages of building their agency. My name is Marcus Taylor, and I'll be your host. Hey guys, welcome to episode 7 of the 10x Your Agency podcast. Today I'm joined by a good friend of mine, Dan Sharp, who is the founder of Screaming Frog. So Screaming Frog are perhaps best known for their software, the Screaming Frog SEO Spider, which is used by hundreds of thousands of companies like Disney, Apple, Google, and many, many more. So we're going to be talking to Dan about how he has kind of grown the agency as well as the software and how he kind of balances the team between the two different sides of the business. Some of the kind of benefits around that, the relationship of having both software and an agency, as well as also some of the drawbacks. So Dan, it's a huge pleasure having you here on the show. How's it going?
Hey Marcus, yeah, not too bad, thanks. Thanks for inviting me on.
So before we jump in, I was just wondering, can you maybe share with us a little bit about what is Screaming Frog and perhaps what is it that makes you different to other agencies out there?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, Screaming Frog is an agency, which I don't necessarily think a lot of people realise, because obviously they call our software Screaming Frog, and our software is the SEO Spider. So I think there's probably a little bit of confusion there, just because our software has been so popular over the years. But we're an agency. We're based in Henley-on-Thames in the UK. I think there's 32 of us now. We've been going for about 6 years. I guess, what makes us different is that we do have the software side as well as agency. When I say software, we have the SEO Spider, which everybody calls Screaming Frog. And then more recently, we've developed a log file analyzer as well. And that came out middle of this year.
Got it. And what kind of services do you specialize in with Screaming Frog?
Very much search, so SEO predominantly. We do a little bit of PPC, CRO, and analytics consultancy, stuff like that.
So the software that you've developed, the Screaming Frog SEO Spider, it's been used by hundreds of thousands of companies. We use it. We've been using it for a couple of years now. Companies like Apple, Google, Amazon, Disney all use it. It's been a huge success. I was wondering, what impact has having the software side of the business had on the agency side of the business?
That's an interesting question, because I think it's been positive, but also kind of negative in a way as well. I definitely think that it's helped build brand awareness. Everybody's heard of us, and it's definitely helped us win, some SEO consulting business off the back of having the software. There's in-house SEOs who have used our tool, found it useful, and then realised that we also offer some consulting and come to us for general SEO projects. However, on the other side, I think conversely, the tool has been so popular that a lot of people just don't realise that we're an agency as well, and just think that we build software. You could say, I think that, we've probably been overlooked sometimes as well. So it's a difficult one. In reality, we're an agency and we built the software for ourselves to use in our own consultancy. And then it just transpired that we ended up releasing it publicly.
And is there anything that you do to kind of drive any sort of active things that you're doing to drive people from the software to the agency or vice versa?
Not specifically. I mean, it's all on the same website. So if you visit the website, you'll see our software and you also see, our services. But we don't necessarily do anything special. We'll probably come on to this a little bit later, but we're not overly promotional or anything along those lines. We don't say, and we also offer consulting or anything like that. We haven't built anything into the app. We don't even go as far as, and lots of companies do this, we don't collect users' details, email addresses. You can just download the software for free to crawl up to 500 URLs, and we don't require anything from you whatsoever. A lot of people would take an email address and then spam you to death afterwards. We don't even, we don't do that.
Got it. So a lot of agencies obviously strive to kind of build tools on the side and software to generate passive recurring income to kind of supplement the sometimes volatile nature of having consulting clients. Yet from what I've seen, most agencies typically kind of fail with this, because when you have these two options. You have billable hours that you can assign to client projects, or you could work on a project that may or may not end up in generating results. Most agency owners typically focus on the billable hours side.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, in the early days, how did you justify putting team members onto the software project before it even had any success? What was the kind of thinking around that?
To be honest, there wasn't really any thinking, and it was actually a lot easier in the early days, just because the software itself was being built when I was an SEO consultant going under the name Screaming Frog, and it was being built in the evenings and weekends. So it wasn't being built during billable or work hours. Historically, I used to have a lot of fun at my previous agency when I was working as an SEO. Used to work late into the evenings doing affiliate stuff. So I was quite used to working in the evenings and things like that anyway. And my brother, who's a developer on the tool, spent his own personal time building the software, which we never knew would work. And it was only being built for us anyway. So there was not necessarily anything to lose, only our personal time. So it made it quite easy, really. And arguably, it's got harder as we've become a proper business, in that the challenge has been sometimes taking ourselves away from developing the SEO Spider. For example, more recently we released the log file analyzer, and we had to take some of our developers off of the SEO Spider from developing features for a large user base to kind of develop this new tool. There's a certain risk to that, and it was quite hard to do, but in the end it was well worth doing it, and it's helped us develop more technical learnings that are going to be integrated into the Spider at a later date and things. But early stages, it was easy. So
you mentioned that Screaming Frog is currently around kind of 32 people, I think.
Yeah.
What's the kind of breakdown in terms of team size as to people that work on the software versus number of people that are predominantly focused on the agency side?
Yeah. So we've got a fairly small in-house development team. So I would say there are around 4 or 5 people who work on the SEO Spider full-time. That doesn't really include support, just because we've got, a fairly large user base. We get loads of support queries and things like that. So the rest of the SEO team, which probably is around about 25 people, is kind of split out between the more technical SEOs to deal with the support.
And they're also the ones doing the agency services as well.
Exactly that, yeah. So we've got a fairly small PPC team of a couple of people, and then between 20 and 25 people who work on, SEO projects, technical SEO consultancy. We've got, of those 20 to 25 people, we've got 4 designers and a front-end dev who work on creating content for clients. We create a lot of visual content and things like that. So working on content marketing and link building campaigns too.
And in terms of the kind of the revenue coming into the company, what's the sort of the approximate split of percentage of revenue coming from the agency services versus directly from the software projects?
It's pretty even, actually. I expect a lot of people probably don't realise or haven't realised that we're an agency, weren't necessarily expecting that. But the agency side of the business is actually, very profitable and does extremely well.
Yeah, because my sort of assumption, having used Screaming Frog for a couple of years, so many companies are using it. I would almost have expected, wouldn't have been surprised if it was kind of 80-90% of the revenue. But that's interesting that it, just shows how big the agency portion is relative to the software.
Yeah, absolutely. That might not always be the case, because obviously we've got a new piece of software now which is starting to perform well, and we've made a few price changes and things like this. So historically, it's been very even anyway.
In terms of the future, do you see the scale in terms of growing Screaming Frog as a company? Do you see that coming more from the agency side or the software, or still keeping it at that kind of 50-50-ish?
It's so hard to say. I mean, we're just working towards growth on
push up all the numbers
on both sides. Yeah, it makes sense to. We've got a really talented and great team, on the SEO side of the business or the agency side of the business. We're actually doing a lot more paid search, paid social as well these days, and things like that. So they're both growing. It's been positive on both sides, really.
What would you say are like the pros and cons of doing the agency work versus the software? You've obviously seen both business models and the pros and cons. What are the things that attract you maybe to software, or things that you like about the agency side?
Yeah, I mean, there's pros and cons to both. It depends really on the person and how you like to work, I guess. We still love consulting, so we still like working directly with clients and kind of helping clients succeed and seeing, their business improve and things like that. And you won't necessarily see that, obviously, on the software side. You get to hear about, some things and that it's helped users achieve and fix and things like that, but you don't see the wider impact that you might with a client. I think personally they go hand in hand really well. It's a question I've had in the past where, people have said, when are you going to split it out? When are you going to just focus on software or whatever it might be? But I think they work really nicely together. And the reason I say that is that I believe in the past anyway, I've seen some companies who gave up consulting to purely work on software may have lost their edge a little bit sometimes, a little bit of perspective. Working with brands or small and medium-sized businesses that we do as well helps us to understand the pain points better. Consulting and working in the SEO trenches, as it were, keeps you pretty grounded and you get to understand what's important to those who really use the software.
You mentioned earlier that you haven't really done any significant marketing around Screaming Frog as an agency or Screaming Frog as the SEO spider. It's kind of an interesting approach because there's other tools out there with tens of millions in VC money. They're exhibiting at all of these conferences, spending tons of cash on running ads. Yet you seem to be marching to a slightly different beat in terms of how you're acquiring customers. And it's obviously working really, really well. I mean, as we said, you've got hundreds of thousands of customers, including some very, very impressive brands. So what's the sort of strategy behind how you're acquiring customers?
This is kind of a common theme, really. There wasn't really a strategy in place to start with. We've never done any marketing. We've never hired a salesperson at Screaming Frog. And I mean that on the software or agency side. We don't have anybody who works in business development or anything along those lines. We don't even give out, free licenses to SEO influencers. So they talk about our software, like most SEO tool companies do. The big SEOs in the industry who go around and speak at all of the events. Hardly any of them, I think, pay for any of those tools. So I'd argue that sometimes their viewpoint doesn't always consider cost and kind of value for money. Everybody has to pay for our software pretty much just to make it fair. And, I guess, the reason for that is that historically we've always... I think everybody loves a salesman a little bit. And in the past, when I've worked at previous agencies, it can be a little bit difficult to control salespeople. They don't always bring in the right type of business from an agency perspective and things like that. From a company perspective, the closest that we've done to any kind of marketing is that we sponsor the beer mats at Brighton SEO. And that's just because we love the event and the job that Kelvin obviously does there. Plus we like beer, it seemed to match. So it makes sense. But really, more seriously, what do we actually do to acquire these thousands of customers? All we did is we built a product that solved their problems. We released regular updates. We really listen to our users, and I mean really listen. So there's been so much feedback from users over the years and from the community. We've really integrated that into our software. I'm just not sure whether everybody else does that. I think everybody says they do, but I'm really not sure whether they do. And plus, I do think we have earned the respect of fellow SEOs and people within the industry because we're doing the same job that they are. I remember Rand, I think we had a chat one time, Marcus, and I think I mentioned this before. Rand once tweeted something along the lines of, the best way to sell is don't sell anything, just, earn the respect and trust of those who might buy it or something along those lines. And we kind of have always taken that kind of approach. I tweet as Screaming Frog still, that's almost like my personal account rather than the company. I talk about the SEO industry, algorithmic updates we see, we share Googlebot tests that we do internally. We try and be really helpful on Twitter and on support. And we help with agencies and consultants with absolutely tons of kind of problems and technical issues that sometimes go outside the remit of the spider, I have to say. So I think all of that stuff together has kind of really helped and kind of given us a good rapport anyway.
Yeah. So you mentioned kind of listening to users and taking that feedback as a means of putting ideas back in the top of the funnel when it comes to product development and refining the product. How do you approach that? Because I suppose unlike a lot of software as a service tools where you can install a tracking code or use live chat to kind of speak directly to users, the Screaming Frog SEO Spider is a downloadable piece of software that sits on computers. So how do you go about gathering those kind of user insights and listening and speaking directly with your users?
Yeah, so historically, users have always emailed us. We have, a support page on the website. Within the app itself, we have buttons for support and feedback that allows users just to go to the web page and submit a contact form with any suggestions and things like that. And then all of that goes into some software that we use called Help Scout, which is really cool, and it's just kind of a ticketing system. So we log kind of all the requests and things like that. Anything that we think is a cool idea, we then put it into something as simple as a Google Doc that we have with all of our ideas that kind of get prioritized. And we jot up the numbers of requests for some of those things so we get a good idea of popularity around new features. And sometimes, it's not always about new features. There's also, bugs in the software or small improvements that could be made or an adjustment to a configuration or something along those lines. And we kind of, we just prioritize it based on feedback and obviously with a bit of steer from us in terms of what we think, is the right direction to go in as well.
What have been the kind of the challenges around that? Because I guess, when you've got hundreds of thousands of people using the software and, I can only imagine the sheer kind of frequency of support requests, feature requests, bugs, those kind of things that are coming in. And you mentioned that there's only kind of 4 or 5 developers working on it. How do you go about kind of making sure that you're working on the right things and ensuring that kind of product roadmap doesn't get too kind of backlogged?
Yeah, I mean, it can be difficult. Yeah, as I say, we look at the numbers and then we discuss it internally, essentially, and we build out the kind of roadmap, the immediate roadmap for the next release, and discuss which features we believe and which improvements should make the next release, and then ultimately work towards that next release together as a team. You say we've got a small team, and you're certainly right, but what we do have in terms of development is we have a very experienced development team, and generally developers get to a certain level and they start managing people and coding less, things like that. But ours are very much coders and they're very hands-on, and it allows us to work very quickly. Sometimes you can have a big development team and actually it can make you slower. So we've been particularly careful with growing as a team of developers and when's the right time to hire and the right type of developers to hire, whether you hire somebody more senior or whether you go for a graduate and show them the ropes and train them along the way.
In terms of building up the agency side of Screaming Frog, or I should just say Screaming Frog, really, isn't it? Like, it is the agency. So in terms of building up Screaming Frog as the agency, what have been some of the biggest challenges that you've come across?
There's been quite a few challenges along the way. The kind of usual stuff, I guess, from a personal perspective, having the time for everything can be quite difficult when you're running your own business. Splitting my time between kind of each side of the business, the agency side and software, so consulting, running the SEO team and working on the Spider. And I used to do all the support as well. I used to do all the support by myself, and that was really hard work. I think what we learned was you've got to build the right team and you've got to build the right core at the start, ideally get the right types of people at that early stage so you can kind of get the foundation in correctly for growing, essentially. But I think consulting is difficult to grow. I think there's always challenges. You've got to make sure that you've got the right people, principles and processes in place, but it's still always challenging because there's always things outside of your control. You can work with the best clients, you can run the best campaigns, and it doesn't always necessarily mean you can keep the clients because something might happen their end, people move, or their products or businesses might have problems and things like that. So it's challenging, certainly.
Before we go on, if you're looking to grow your client base and capture more leads for your agency, then I'd recommend checking out Leadformly. Leadformly is a lead generation tool run by yours truly that enables you to upgrade the forms on your website to conversion optimized forms that are going to increase your conversion rate and help you capture more qualified leads from your website. Using Leadformly, we've seen agencies capture up to 700% more leads. So if you're interested in giving it a try, we have a 14-day free trial that you can check out at leadformly.com. That's leadformly.com. Once again, that's at leadformly.com. How old is Screaming Frog actually?
6 years.
6 years. So from like the initial period where it was you still doing support for the software and building that up to where it is today, you know, where you've got quite a large team, 32 people, and these kind of 3 key different areas to the business, what would you say have been like the toughest transition periods? And either in terms of sort of going, you know, the number of people going from like 10 to 20 or different phases of the company, what would you say have been the times or areas that were particularly tough?
I would say definitely the earlier stages, particularly when you're fairly small and you're bringing in the core of the team, and particularly because of where we are, you know, we all struggle to find on the agency side, you know, good people with experience. Essentially, you know, we're far enough away from London where we can't really attract necessarily anybody from London. And yet we're kind of close enough that quite a few people seem to go to London to work. As you probably know, you're just down the road. We quite often hired, you know, grads and trained them up. So that was definitely a sort of challenging time in those early stages when you're hiring graduates and you're training them. But at the same time, you know, there's positives as well in that, you know, you can show them the right approach. Quite a few people that we did speak to had experience, probably had experience in the wrong type of SEO or things that we didn't really want to do. But I'd definitely say that was the hardest stage, you know, where the team was growing and it was in that early stage, and, you know, had to spend a lot of my time consulting with clients, plus managing the team, going to a lot of client meetings and things like that while still working, you know, on the Spider, and then doing support in the evenings and during the day. You know, there were times where, you know, I was working constantly. And it's a little bit easier now. And that's simply because, you know, we have an awesome team who do a lot of those things. And while there's other challenges, you know, from having larger teams and the relationships that you can get in the team and things like that, I definitely think it's made it easier being able to, you know, rely on other people and having people with their own ideas, and they're far more experienced anyway and talented these days.
Can you sort of trace it back to like a moment or a decision or a person that you hired that took you from that tough stage to completely changing the business to where it is today? Like, is there sort of like an obvious thing, or was it just the combination of lots of little changes that got you there?
I think it's probably a combination of things, to be honest. It probably is, you know. So I think we made some, you know, really smart hires. We've got a really good team. We've got a great head of SEO. You know, Matt Hobson, our SEO manager's fantastic. We've got some great SEO managers as well. So done some really good hires. And we also brought on, one of the most significant things was bringing on developers full time rather than just working within the evenings and at weekends and things like that. You know, making that transition to, I'm doing this full time now and I'm really focusing on the software, and that's that.
Okay, Dan, what I want to do now, I've got a couple of quickfire questions that I want to go through. The first one is, what is your number one book recommendation for other business owners?
Probably Purple Cow, Seth Godin. I thought that was awesome. I need to read more, though. I keep watching series and things instead of reading books.
Favorite tool right now, other than Screaming Frog?
I'll go with, Away From Mars. Really like Systrix at the moment. Mm-hmm. So it's similar to kind of Search Metrics and SEMrush. I think they've been around longer. So they're based in Germany, but there's some really great data you can get from them on SEO visibility and keywords and lots of other stuff anyway. And they're great guys too.
What's one piece of advice that you would give to another agency owner who's looking to go from 6 figures up to 7 figures?
Yes, I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier. Learn to trust in your team, definitely. Be happy with delegating and empowering them to help out and do the work too. Otherwise, you'll have a bad time trying to do it all by yourself.
What were some of the biggest causes, or let's say the one biggest cause of client churn in the early days of Screaming Frog?
I think probably taking on the wrong type of clients. That's probably a similar one to a lot of agencies, but taking on clients that weren't necessarily a great match, but you went for it anyway because you wanted to grow, you wanted to bring in the revenue, and quite often they just don't work out. So trust your intuition at those early stages still.
Short-term over long-term thinking.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
What's next for Screaming Frog? What can we expect to see over the next couple of years?
Imminently, we've got version 7 of the SEO Spider coming out. It's pretty much cooked, so that should be ready in the next couple of weeks. From the agency side, we've just made a couple of new hires of digital PR and front-end development, which is pretty exciting. So just carry on doing what we're doing, really.
Awesome. And lots of exciting new stuff from the log file analyzer by the looks of things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we were really excited about releasing the new piece of software. It seems to have gone down well. And there'll be some more developments of that early next year too.
With version 7 of the Spider, what's new in version 7?
I'm not sure if I can give it away, but
okay.
just to be really boring. But there's some features that go alongside our new rendered crawling. So we render web pages and execute JavaScript and dynamic content similar to how Googlebot do. So there's a couple of features that work alongside that help you visualize that essentially as well.
Awesome. Cool. All right, Dan. Well, this has been really, really good, really interesting stuff. If people want to learn a bit more about either Screaming Frog, the Spider, or Log File Analyzer, what's the best place for them to find you and learn more about that?
Just visit our website, screamingfrog.co.uk.
Awesome. All right, Dan, it's been a huge pleasure, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Marcus.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the 10x Your Agency podcast. If you're interested in acquiring more leads for your business, I'd like to invite you to a free webinar that I'll be hosting on how to acquire 300% more leads from your website without increasing your traffic. In this webinar, I'll be sharing how you can turn your website into a lead generation machine, 4 strategies on how you can boost your form submissions by 300%, and much more. So if you're interested, all you need to do is go to Google, type in Leadformly, acquire more leads. That's Leadformly, spelled Leadformly, acquire more leads. And the landing page to register for the webinar should appear at the top. As I said, it's completely free and we run this webinar every single week. So once again, thanks for listening to this week's episode and stay tuned for next week's episode of the 10x Your Agency podcast.